But there is no response coming from the government. No response.
The government is in no mood to budge on changes to the Land Acquisition Act. Union Minister Nitin Gadkari puts up a spirited defence as farmers in rural India stand to gain from the proposed amendments. Hits out at the opposition for doublespeak. Sources say the centre will not shy away from the joint session of Parliament to push through the changes.
If this award had been less generous to the states in terms of vertical devolution, then the central government would have done what it seeks to do, which is increase public investment while maintaining its FD target.
The director of the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy believes the government has a limited room to ramp up public spending on infrastructure due to higher tax devolution to states and stringent deficit targets.
Former Finance Secretary and now BJP member N.K. Singh expects tax stops from the upcoming budget to revive the manufacturing sector. Also says the government will have to set an even more aggressive disinvestment target for the next fiscal to meet its revenue challenge.
The Aam Aadmi Party government in Delhi walks the talk. Power tariffs slashed by 50% for consumption up to 400 units a month. Government will provide the subsidy payment to power distributors upfront. Also sanctions 20,000 litres of free water to every household.
Deal Street is buzzing with activity. Cement giant Dalmia hikes its stake in subsidiary OCL India, setting the stage for a merger. M&M plans to acquire controlling stake in debt-ridden ABG shipyard.
Late sell-off on the Lal Street once again as expiry and pre-budget jitters take the toll. Sensex clings on to 29,000. Rupee continues to gain ground, breaks below the 62 mark against the dollar.
There are several things that make India relatively attractive.
UBS bets big on India, says it stands out among emerging markets that's following the reform agenda of the government, hails the progress made to trim the fiscal deficit and expects crude prices to rebound to $75 a barrel by the end of the year.
Jaguar and Land Rover looking to spread their wings. Ratan Tata says a manufacturing facility in North America is coming soon. The United States contributes to about 17% of total JLR sales.
You will soon be able to retain the same mobile phone number no matter where you relocate to in the country. The TRAI issues guidelines on a pan-India mobile number portability. New rules come into effect starting the 3rd of May this year.
The world's most valuable company, Apple, is found guilty of patent infringement. A federal jury in the US slaps a $500 million penalty on Apple for copyright violations in the iTunes software.
Railways are a engine of growth. We need to put railways back on track. Railways have been very underinvested for a long time. Railways need investment. The government has a limitation because government cannot put more money because the gross budgetary support which comes from the finance ministry. When a country is running fiscal deficit, obviously my colleague finance minister also is having the same problem which I am facing of finding resources. We are exploring almost many options, going outside the normal thinking that we had in the government before. I hope we succeed in that. And if we do that, I'm sure railways will start running again faster. The economy will also be healthy.
When Suresh Prabhu took office, he promised to change the face of the Indian Railways, and tomorrow when he stands to present his first railway budget, expectations will be running high. No fare hike is expected, and the recent fall in crude oil prices will certainly help the railways save some money and hopefully deploy it to build better infrastructure. Is the Indian Railways set for a major makeover? We will track the railway budget through the day, starting tomorrow on CNBC TV 18. Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us on India Business Hour. Nantara, will the railways get back on track? What's your
Well, if Suresh Prabhu comes out with a great budget, maybe they could start the recovery process. Some comfort, of course, coming in from crude prices.
Absolutely. What can you expect from the railway budget and which stocks to watch out for? That's coming up for you in just a bit. But first up, a quick check of the day's trading action. Volatility continues to rule the roost on the Lal Street. The budget is just around the corner. And add to that the futures and options expiry. This heady cocktail is keeping the bulls nervous. The Sensex tanking in the last hour to give up almost all of its gains. The index is barely holding on to the 29,000 mark. The Nifty surging past 8,800 in early trade, but then the late sell-off wiped out those gains. The mid-caps continue to underperform the blue chips, with the index ending the day with marginal losses. Well, speaking of the markets, here's the UBS view, believes that India is one of the most attractive emerging markets.
There are several things that make India relatively attractive. First of all, much of the emerging complex is suffering from the steep declines in commodity prices. And apart from food, India, of course, is primarily a user of commodities and therefore a general beneficiary of, for example, falling oil prices. Those benefits have also been, to some extent, taken advantage of by the new government with their attempts to reduce fuel subsidies, which will help, of course, the fiscal position of the country and is part of a broader reform agenda that investors are looking forward to eagerly.
The CBS's view on where the Wall Street is headed. The stock markets may have a case of the jitters, but the currency market seems a little more optimistic. The rupee extended its gains against American currency for the second day in a row on the back of optimism that the budget will push forward more reforms, initiatives and growth measures. Sustained dollar selling by banks also helped, and the domestic currency surged 23 paise to end at a 3-week high of 61.97 against the greenback currency.
But the top story this evening, the government and the opposition on a war path over the proposed changes to the Land Acquisition Act. The centre staying firm about the changes to the Act, even as pressure continues to mount today. In fact, Road Transport Minister Nitin Gadkari defended the proposed changes, saying that it's not anti-poor, and sources say the centre will not shy away from pushing through a joint session of Parliament if the need arises. Nentar, you've been tracking this story. A spirited defence there being put up by the government, saying that these are changes that other state chief ministers, including Congress-ruled state chief ministers, also wanted. They're not touching the compensation clause. They're not touching the resettlement clause either. Do you believe that this government is serious about pushing this through, even if it means a joint session of Parliament?
Well, that is exactly what I'm picking up, that the government right now seems confident is going to be able to push through the land ordinance if it has to come down to it, and call a joint session of both the houses. There are about 8 or 9 ordinances that anyway have to pass through. So maybe besides land, maybe 1 or 2 more may have to go through that joint session in any case. And we've been hearing the top BJP leadership talk about that as well. The Prime Minister, government sources saying the top BJP leadership in no mood to water down that land ordinance. They believe this ordinance is actually pro-poor, is actually pro-farmer, that right now you have a bad land law which can halt land acquisition, and if that's the case, that's actually bad for the landowners. The compensation clause has not been touched at all. Industry has anyway been saying it's quite expensive when you look at it at 4 times the market price. The agitation that you've seen outside of the Parliament, I'm talking about Anna Hazare and Arvind Kejriwal in New Delhi yesterday, sources in the government saying that, it was not as big as had been anticipated. It had fizzled out by the end of the day. At one point, there were only 200 people. Then you've had the Shiv Sena, for example, an NDA ally, which refused to enter a meeting with Rajnath Singh just yesterday. Today, softening its stance. LJP, another NDA ally, expected to perhaps fall in line with the BJP as far as this issue goes. Right now, early days as yet, you have this budget session going on all the way till May. So let's see what happens. And Shireen, let's also not forget the TMC, which had disrupted Parliament. This time seems a little quiet.
Yes, we haven't seen the disruption that we saw in the previous Parliament session, but of course the opposition continues to maintain that it will oppose the ordinance. But here's Nitin Gadkari on the proposed changes to the Land Acquisition Act and why the ordinance route is what the government has chosen to do.
ये ऑर्डिनेंस निकालना बहुत जरूरी था, और अभी जो जानकारी मुझे मिली है, नेशनल हाईवे जो मेरा डिपार्टमेंट है और कोल इंडिया का जो कोयला मंत्रालय है लैंड एक्विजिशन के लिए, हम दोनों डिपार्टमेंट ने केवल 2000 करोड़ से ज्यादा रकम किसानों को नए जो दर है उसके रूप में दी है। अगर ये नहीं आता तो किसानों को ये पैसा नहीं मिलता। मेरे पास राज्य सरकार या बाकी केंद्र सरकार के डिपार्टमेंट का भी हिसाब नहीं है, तो ऑर्डिनेंस आने के कारण किसानों का फायदा हुआ है। रूरल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में हमने इरिगेशन को लाया, हमने रूरल डेवलपमेंट को लाया, सोशल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में हॉस्पिटल्स को लाया, एजुकेशन इंस्टीट्यूशन को लाया। ये 4 चीजें लाने के बाद और एक 5वीं चीज इंडस्ट्रियल कॉरिडोर को लाया। अब इंडस्ट्रियल कॉरिडोर जो देश में बन रहा है, उसमें ये इंडस्ट्रियल कॉरिडोर जो है ये विलेजेस को लगकर बनने वाला, ये कोई सिटी में नहीं बन रहा है।
Well, that's the government defending the land acquisition ordinance. Now, as it finds itself under pressure, the government today came out to bat, as we just told you, for the land ordinance. Kritika Saxena reports that some hard selling will be needed for the government to convince not just the opposition, but also industry. Listen in.
We've kind of put ourselves in a bind by introducing the act in the first place and then trying to amend it because the act as it stands is incapable of actually being implemented in the true spirit that it is meant to be.
A reaction from India Inc. on the ongoing drama surrounding the land acquisition ordinance. As the government puts up stiff resistance to the opposition surrounding the ordinance, industry seems to have its own set of concerns.
This government has tried to, through the ordinance, change the procedure. It has not changed the compensation. The process itself is so cumbersome that a poor farmer who wants to actually sell his land will virtually not be able to sell it, and the one who wants to acquire it will not be able to acquire it. So both the needs of the farmer, the needs of the development process and the needs of the buyer all are being compromised through the Acquisition Act as well as through the amendment in the ordinance.
Price discovery of land is a major bone of contention as that will determine the compensation to be paid to the displaced land owners. The exemption of projects under 5 key sectors, including defence, affordable housing, rural infrastructure, industrial corridors and public-private partnership projects from the consent clause is also turning into a major point of debate both inside and outside Parliament. While industry members feel this will spur investment in these areas, others aren't convinced. Some experts also see the removal of the need to have a social impact study as a big negative.
If not 70% or 80% that we are talking about, I think if we can do better investigation of social impact, what impact it is going to have, what will be the public purpose, how the community is going to be affected, if people are involved in this decision-making process, if we can, from consent, if we could come out with a mechanism for consent come consultation or consultation come consent, we will have to have some sort of consent when you are going to acquire land.
As the debate over the land bill rages on, most industry players believe that it may take a long time for the actual law to see light of day, and its implementation perhaps another few years. In Mumbai, Kritika Saxena.
Well, the land debate will continue. We understand that the Finance Minister may address the Rajya Sabha tomorrow on the issue. Now, Union Minister Suresh Prabhu will present his maiden railway budget. What can we expect and which stocks should we watch out for? Varinder joins us now with all the answers. Varinder, what's the market hoping for?
So thank you so much. Clearly, a new railway minister and a fresh rail budget. A lot of expectations in this budget, but the bigger question everyone is asking is where will the money come from? Investors are looking for easy public-private partnership, that is PPP norms, which may be announced in this budget, and of course a clear roadmap for foreign investors post-FDI in railways. I'll highlight some of the important things, what most of the street or the analysts are expecting in this budget. Don't expect any fare, changes, and the, no pass-through of lower diesel prices in this budget. So that is one. The second, of course, and the most important one is the freight, the dedicated freight corridor. There could be many announcements regarding there. So watch out for Concor Container Corporation of India. That could be stock to watch out for. Of course, we all know that the freight income is nearly 65% or to 68% of the railway, and that is a major one. Any FDI reforms coming in that in the dedicated freight corridors and other projects such as Diamond Quadrilateral in the future could be very important to watch out for. Of course, railways have a lot of free land, a lot of surplus land which is lying over there. Any announcement coming in terms to mobilize funds, via monetizing this surplus land could be very important to watch out for. And one number which everyone watching the street is the operating ratio number. FY15 estimate was 92.5%. Anything below 90% could be important and could be very good for most of the railway stocks. Of course, station development is another area what we are hearing could be focused in the railway budget. So some of the infra-related companies, like Simplex Infra, HCC, could be one to watch out for. Otherwise, the usual suspects like passenger amenities, safety enhancement, implementing e-governance, stocks like CMC, Vakrangi could also be in focus. But clearly, I'll be watching out for the operating ratio. Any announcement coming on the freight corridor, and of course any use of the surplus land, that remains the most, and that remains the top 3 things for me to watch out in the railway budget.
So will Suresh Prabhu walk the talk? Will we see a sweeping budget? Thanks a lot, Varinder, for joining us with those details. And railway companies have always been eagerly awaiting this day. Here's their reactions and expectations from Suresh Prabhu.
My wish list is not to hear so much about the quantity of wagons that will be purchased, because that's not the be-all and end-all of wagon business. What we would like to see is that how the roadmap for the future of wagon industry and the future of railway traffic is going to be laid down.
I think we should wait till the minister announced, but then a lot of expectation minister arose. With industry, he has a constant interaction, and he's working out on this thing, that how he can revive the rail sector, which should be the prime sector in the country today. So that's all being worked out. I think we should wait till at least the budget is out. But budget will be very exciting. This is what the industry is expecting this time.
Because that's what the companies want from Suresh Prabhu. What about the commuters? What are their expectations? Perhaps we're not going to see a wage hike, but here's Maresh Shakil with that story.
The focus of this budget is that it is not going to be populist. This budget will be largely focused on several ideas that the Prime Minister himself has been talking about, be it Make in India, so the focus being about indigenous technology, be it the skill development, so those stations which do not have too many trains can have a significant portion of the station being used for skill development, be it the self-help groups or otherwise. And the focus largely being on the pending projects, those projects which have not been completed. So in terms of announcement of new projects, that is unlikely, because there are over 350 projects of railways which are pending, and the railway requires over 2 lakh crores for completing these projects. So clearly, as far as the numbers are concerned, there is a big challenge before the railway minister.
All right, so commuters, be prepared. No fare hike, so no need to brace yourselves, and maybe we could see some measures there as far as the cleanliness test is concerned, though my sense is that that's unlikely. Now, the Finance Minister's budget speech is likely to highlight the government's decision to give states a higher share of taxes as an effort by the Modi administration to reset centre-state relations. While the government says the move is historic and will help provide an economic lift to states, economists believe the centre will find itself constrained to spend big money to pump prime the economy. Sapna Das spoke with the director of the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy to get you more.
The Modi government is likely to find itself in a difficult spot when it comes to giving a big push to public investment in the coming budget. Experts say, with the centre agreeing to the 14th Finance Commission's devolution formula, resources within the budget will be limited, and a big spend on infrastructure to stimulate growth seems unlikely.
What the Prime Minister's intention was to increase spending on national public goods like infrastructure, because PPP has not been working. So there was a felt need, CA also said that we need to step up how much government spends on these, which you could do through the public investment, public sector route as well. But another route to do it is to just increase the amount of fiscal resources from the budget devoted to public investment consistent with the fiscal deficit target. That is going to be difficult.
To balance expenditure and remain within the fiscal deficit target of 3.6%, the budget will have to focus on rationalizing subsidies and effecting deep cuts in central assistance to state plans. Outlays to government flagship programs like MGNREAG may also see some rationalization. While on the revenue side, disinvestment target will have to be scaled up in a big way to generate resources. Even the borrowings of the centre in the new fiscal will go towards meeting revenue expenditure and not towards public investment, as advocated by the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramaniam.
It means either that we are going to have to then see what we can do in terms of increasing revenues, and the only scope left to government to do that is a sharply accelerated disinvestment program. And it's possibly the emergency actions that were taken in December to increase disinvestment are a consequence of the government being aware of this. But of course, what it means is that the stated assumptions underlying the centre share of revenues will no longer be valid.
Interestingly, the 14th Finance Commission has suggested relaxing the centre's revenue deficit targets under the FRBM Act by almost 0.5%. On the face of it, this may allow the centre some breathing room for its revenue expenditure and probably also allow it to show lower projections next year. But then, this approach will bring down public investment and the need to push investment in infrastructure particularly all the more. In New Delhi, Sapna Das.
So we may not see a big push as far as infrastructure spending by the government is concerned, but manufacturing can expect a major push in the upcoming budget. Former Finance Secretary and now a BJP member NK Singh spoke with me earlier. He expects the budget to try and boost the manufacturing sector to help realize the Make in India dream. He also spoke about the government's move to accept the 14th Finance Commission's proposal to put more money in the hands of state governments. He believes that this is a historic move and that this will in fact provide an economic lift to the economy. Listen in.
The Prime Minister has been audacious in fully implementing what he believes, namely cooperative federalism, namely assigning to the states the more important obligation, namely moving away from the colonial belief that, the white man's burden or the burden that the center knows what is best for the states, having one size fits all. So I think by a combination of all this, by accepting this audacious recommendation of the Finance Commission in giving 40% instead of 32%, which was there earlier, a huge devolution of extra resources to the states, and giving the states the latitude and the flexibility to spend it on projects and on schemes which suit their local needs and which meets their priorities. So I think this is fiscal federalism in operation in a very, very significant way, a quantum shift from an earlier period when a lot of the devolution took place through centrally sponsored schemes and schemes which really were settled to the predilections and to the policy preferences of the central government.
Countdown to the budget has begun, and you were talking about the challenge that the centre will need to face as far as mobilizing revenues are concerned. Beyond even more aggressive disinvestment target, what are the other ideas that you would like to see this government take forward in terms of revenue mobilization?
Imaginative ways of doing it. I believe that the responses to the spectrum auction are likely to be quite robust. I think that the disinvestment programs outcomes are likely to be quite robust. I mean, although the gains from the coal auction will substantially go to the states, there are other programs which they have in mind. For instance, I think on recapitalization of banks, I think there are many banks where I think that they can come down up to the stipulated 51% and being able to garner resources, thereby freeing up more fiscal space instead of using up money which they require for a recapitalization consistent with meeting the requirements of the Basel III norms. So I think there are many innovative ways of raising resources, and that is a challenge which I said of the central government garnering the resources necessary, consequent upon accepting this audacious recommendation of the 14th Finance Commission.
The government has been talking about Make in India, and we're positioning this budget as the Make in India budget, specifically to boost manufacturing. Do you believe that we will see specific measures being taken by this government? For instance, a lower levy or a differential rate of MAT to boost infrastructure and manufacturing. Do you believe that that is the path that the government and the Finance Minister ought to take to make in India a reality?
Well, I'm quite confident that the Make in India program, which is one of government's very high priority program, will receive a combination of fiscal and monetary kind of incentives to really make it into a tangible progress in the coming future. It can take many innovative forms. It can take not only in terms of specific tax breaks under Section 35AD, which gives you a kind of a tax relief in terms of various kinds of activities. It also will require the availability of credit on much more in a manner which is far easier than has been. It, of course, also necessary for the ease of business to be vastly improved in terms of enforcement of contracts, in terms of some of the other changes in labor laws and other regulatory environments.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to pick up on those 2 points. So you're saying you do believe that the budget will address both those issues, taxation incentives for infrastructure and manufacturing, as well as a lower rate of credit, so perhaps some kind of interest subvention for specifically the manufacturing sector. You believe the budget will address those 2 issues?
I do not think that the budget should interfere in the credit policy, because I think that that's something which is in the domain of the Reserve Bank. But easier access to credit is vastly different than lowering the cost of credit. And in terms of the taxation policy, make the taxation policies a little more friendly in terms of preferred areas of economic activity. These are kind of ideas which I'm sure the finance minister would be toying with, or the options which would be weighing with him.
So expect incentives for manufacturing, selective incentives, and of course a more aggressive disinvestment target. That's the word coming in from N.K. Singh, member of the BJP and former finance secretary. In fact, the chief economic advisor has also commented on the 14th Finance Commission. Arvind Subramaniam has said the 14th Finance Commission is a watershed, just exactly as we've been reporting, and the government hopes that both the centre and the state will benefit on account of this. But really, the tone coming in from the government seems to suggest that as far as space for big-ticket public investment or public spending on infrastructure, for instance, is concerned, it may be limited, as we've just reported. But on that note, it's time for us to wrap up the show. Thanks very much for watching.